And so it can delight in the spontaneous unfoldment of its own creative possibilities through the minds and senses of all sentient beings. Omkaram bindu samyaktam.
Omkaram bindu samyaktam.
Nityam dayanti yoginaha.
Nityam dayanti yoginaha.
Kamadam mokshadam chaiva.
Kamadam mokshadam chaiva.
Omkaraya namo namaha.
Omkaraya namo namaha.
The syllable Om united with the Bindu on which the yogis ever meditate grants desires and liberation. Salutations to the Omkaram. So that verse that we just chanted together is a salutation to the union of the two most fundamental aspects of our being. And in the yoga tradition that we're interested in exploring, in the tradition, not just the historical tradition, but the tradition of approaching and indeed embodying yoga that we're going to align ourselves with today, that relationship, that union between these fundamental principles is understood in a particular way. And that's what we want to bring into focus together right here in the beginning. Okay? So the syllable Om, the Omkaram, is a symbol of Shiva, a symbol of the consciousness that underlies our personal consciousness. Indeed, a symbol of the consciousness in which the whole phenomenal world appears. So there's the idea in this philosophical tradition that the phenomenal world is the world of appearance, the world that bodies forth for sensuous awareness, the world of which we can be aware when we turn our senses toward it and consider what comes into view. There's a space in which that whole world appears, a space that supports it, that supports appearance, and indeed a consciousness then to which that world appears. And that consciousness is Shiva. And the Omkaram is its symbol. Now the Bindu is a symbol for Shakti. The Bindu is the dimensionless point out of which the mandala appears. So in a cosmic context, the Bindu is even indeed the dimensionless point out of which this physical universe began appearing at the Big Bang. Right? It's also the point into which the universe will eventually contract and implode. Now it says, the syllable Om united with the Bindu on which the yogis ever dwell. Right? What is this union of consciousness and creative power on which the yogis ever dwell? Well, in the first place, the union of consciousness and creative power on which the yogis ever dwell is the union, the interaction, let's say, between these two principles that incites the creative matrix to start bringing its unexpressed possibilities into expressed and so manifest form. Right? So it's an old idea in the Sankhya philosophy, and you find it again in the Yoga Sutra, that what excites creative power, what excites the goddess to start creating, or in the language of the Sankhya, what incites the gunas to start churning, to start moving, is the gaze of awareness, the gaze of Purusha. It's when Purusha brings awareness to the gunas that the gunas start churning. When the gunas start churning, then the sort of sacred, perfect symmetry, the perfect balance of the creative matrix is disturbed, the matrix is rippled, and because it's rippled, something appears. Objects start appearing before consciousness. The phenomenal world starts materializing. Right? So the kind of union, cosmically speaking, that we're interested in is the kind of union, the kind of movement of consciousness toward the unexpressed creative matrix that arouses that matrix and provokes it, say, to start bringing the possibilities with which it's pregnant into fruition, into expression, right? Now, it might be worth considering also how very modern is that idea, or at least how this old idea about the relationship between consciousness and creative power is kind of reiterated in a certain understanding about the physical world that goes with rather contemporary physics, or physics that's only about 100 years old. There's the idea that there are certain dimensions of physical reality, including, if you take particles, certain qualities of those particles, like their spin, their location in space, how fast they're moving through space, that don't have that are indeterminate until they're measured. So when in quantum theory, if you describe physical, you might describe physical space in terms of a mathematical probability that within that space, a certain particle appears with a certain location and spin. And the idea is that probability is not a probability that has to do with your certainty, right? But it's rather a fact about, perhaps it's worth calling it a metaphysical fact about the space itself and the location of the particle in that space, that there's only a probability about whether that particle will be there once it's measured, and no more determinate or definite fact about the matter. So measuring is like a matter of bringing consciousness to the fact. When you have to bring consciousness to the fact to measure the thing, right? So you bring consciousness to the fact, right? Bring an instrument that consciousness has developed to fix the matter, to determine it. And until it's measured, there is no determinate fact, right? And so similarly, until consciousness brings its gaze onto the creative matrix, right, there isn't a definite reality yet that's appearing there, and does not begin to appear and to take actual form until consciousness is brought to it. But when consciousness is brought to it, the form that appears isn't just any form. It's not a form that consciousness dreams up for itself, independently of the creative matrix, but it's rather the response on behalf of the creative matrix to the gaze of consciousness. And in the mythology of Shiva and Shakti, that's an adoring gaze, a gaze that's filled with wonder, that incites the creative matrix to bring forward some possibility with which it's pregnant. So that possibility is already contained within the creative matrix as an unexpressed form, and then is brought to form in response to the interaction between itself and consciousness. When it's aroused by consciousness, it starts to create. It starts to bring forth something that exists inside it in an inchoate form. All right. Now, why would it do that? You might ask. And it's a lovely question, and a question for which there's a lovely mythologic answer. A lovely response cast in mythic terms to help sort of bring into focus, hold in view from a certain perspective what it is that you're seeing when you see the world coming into being. And the idea is that there is a profundity that's replete with different creative possibilities. And it has many powers inside of it that are inchoate or inactive, including the power of reflection and indeed the power of awareness itself. The light of awareness is inside of it, together with all these possibilities for bringing different forms before that light. And for some enchanting, exuberant reason, through some exuberant sort of impulse inside that profundity, some part of it asks itself the question, who am I? What riches lie hidden inside me? What would it feel like to bring those riches into fruition? What would I discover if I turned within myself and drew what exists there only inchoately outward into the light and allowed it to take form and allowed it to exude its fragrance and allowed it to shine in the light? I wonder what that would be like. And that part of the profundity that asks that question is called Shakti. And there's a dimension of consciousness that hears the question, a dimension of the profundity that hears the question and goes, yeah, I wonder that too. What would that be like? That's a fantastic question. And that part is Shiva. Right? And so because of this sort of adoring, inspired, wonder-filled gaze of the light of awareness that then turns toward that aspect of the profundity that asks itself that previous string of questions, that one who possesses all of those creative powers within itself, that dimension of the profundity, Shakti, starts to create, starts to bring the world into being, starts to bring forward different objects, say, of contemplation for the profundity itself. And the part that holds the light of awareness keeps bringing that light toward the process and opening itself up and holding a stable space within which all of these riches can be revealed. All of these riches can exude their sweet fragrances and shine all of their kind of otherworldly reflections into its space. And the idea is that through this very process, the entire world comes into being, including all of the created things, and so all of the creatures that populate the world, and all of the sentient creatures that populate the world are also imbued with a small spark from the flame of consciousness that burns inside that profundity, so that they can reflect inside the inner spaces of their minds, so that they experience their minds as being self-luminous, but their minds are self-luminous only because they contain a spark of that eternal flame. And they contain within them all of the powers of reflection and awareness, indeed even of creation, that are possessed by the profundity, but now in some rather limited form. But they contain those powers within themselves in a limited form precisely so that they can reflect on the interior and the exterior of that space of their own embodiment. And so that they can look out upon each other, and perhaps even when their gaze meet, they can sort of recognize each other as possessing inside them a spark of the eternal. And through their minds and senses, then, the profundity can contemplate itself. It can contemplate its sensuous aspect, the part of itself that bodies forth into the space of sensuous awareness, which is now being held by those individual sentient beings. And through their eyes, it can see itself. And through their nose, it can smell its own fragrances. And through their ears, it can hear the great symphony of sounds, and indeed the cacophony of sounds that it variously can make. And through their fingers, it can touch itself. And through their tongue, it can taste all of the different flavors that are contained inside of it. And so it can delight in the spontaneous unfoldment of its own creative possibilities through the minds and senses of all sentient beings. And in doing that very thing, it fulfills its deep desire to find out what it's like to experience the unfoldment of the creative possibilities that lie dormant and latent inside of it when it's in its unexpressed state. And so, of course, the sentient beings of that world include you and me. And it's through our minds and senses, then, that the profundity engages in this divine act of self-contemplation. Right? Now, that desire that the profundity has to experience itself close up and to experience itself unfolding is a most natural, most primitive impulse in human beings. You see it clearly in children, right? It's like their animating impulse is just to feel what it's like to do anything and everything at all. They're not yet crippled by the sort of encultured adult modes of self-reflection, right? Which are constantly evaluating and constantly putting a judgment and a limitation on everything that they're experiencing. But rather, they're free to exuberantly embrace the raw experience of the senses, the experience of their own bodies moving and breathing, the experience of their own bodies coming into view as they engage with things in their environment, as they smell things and touch things and hear things and reflect on things and learn things and contemplate things. They also, through those very activities, feel themselves and feel close up the unfolding of their own organic life. And they enjoy that immensely, even immeasurably, as we all do when we allow ourselves to do simply that. So there's an idea of yoga according to which the yoga is simply inviting us to participate in that divine self-contemplation. The contemplation in which the profundity engages when it uses the minds and bodies and senses of individual sentient beings to contemplate itself, and so to know itself in that immediate, transient, fleeting sense that goes with self-contemplation. Now, the nature of Shakti is excessive. Excessive because she contains within her endless creative possibilities. There are endless forms that life can take. And no matter how many children are brought into this earth, every one of them somehow, staggeringly, astonishingly, is absolutely unique. However much of their essence and their being they may share with all the rest of humanity, and perhaps even with all the rest of the realm of sentient beings, each one has a kind of singularity that love and friendship honors and appreciates, that we align our hearts with in the modes of love and friendship when we allow the uniqueness of the other to stand forth and come fully into view. When we allow that uniqueness to stand forth, we suspend our conceptual impositions. When we allow the reality of the other to totally stand forth for us in a space of awareness, we do so only because somehow our conceptual impositions, our preconceptions, about that person are suspended. Instead of approaching that person with the thought, I know what you're like, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're going to do and say next. And so refusing to see that person as an organic, living embodiment of an infinite creative energy, but seeing them instead as a sort of predictable, mechanical organization of mental and physical phenomena. So when we allow the presence of the other to truly stand forth, and we suspend those preconceptions, we also make ourselves vulnerable to the reality of the other and vulnerable to the world as it appears through the jewel of their own minds. Recall Indra's net. A net has a lattice structure. It's made of crisscrossing threads. On Indra's net, these threads go off infinitely in every direction. There's no hem, there's no edge to Indra's net. There is just an infinite expanse of crisscrossing threads. And on each one of those points of intersection, there's a jewel. And the jewel, in each jewel on Indra's net, contains within itself the reflection of every other jewel on the entire net, but does so from a unique point of view. Those jewels, of course, are the minds of sentient beings. The suggestion is that every sentient being contains within itself some reflection of every other sentient being, but yet holds, maintains, and sustains a perspective all of its own. When you open yourself to the presence of another, you make yourself vulnerable to that perspective. Each perspective represents a whole nother world, a world that interlaps with all of the other worlds, of course, but a world that has its own sort of magic and organization inside of it. And part of what you get to know when you get to know another person is the way that the world comes into view for that person. In order to know that, you have to suspend your preconceptions about how the world is so that you can open yourself to seeing what they see. And that's not just a matter of imagining how they see things, but actually trying to see the aspects of the world that they see, and in that way to broaden your perspective. So that involves a deep vulnerability, because your world is open to being transformed then by the reality of the other when you relate to the other in that mode of openness that goes with genuine love. That's the kind of love that Shiva has for Shakti. Because Shiva holds space for Shakti to unfold any creative possibilities that she might be so spontaneously inclined to unfold in any given moment. He's heard her ask the question, who am I? And he's fascinated by the question, and he's fascinated by the worlds that she keeps creating in response. he doesn't form any conception of who she is and then try to reduce her to that conception and then get upset if she seems not to conform to that conception, if she seems to deviate from it. He doesn't say, hey, what gives? This is not the version of you that I signed up for. Instead, he keeps his heart open to everything that she shows about herself, and he brooks absolutely no resistance to any of the sides that she shows, but he holds them all, not just with equanimity and contentment, but with wonder and adoration. He has no narrative self-reference point from which to view anything that she shows as a threat, and therefore he's able to embrace all of it openly, and that's why he's the one for her. He just holds space for her to reveal whatever she needs to reveal. And because he does, she comes forward with magnificent, fluid, elegant, organic expression. Would that we bore that relationship toward ourselves. Instead, because we project certain ideas about ourselves and we try to protect those ideas, even though we can easily acknowledge when we reflect on the matter how narrow are the ideas that we have about ourselves and how limiting they tend to be, how they tend to hold us back, to burden us, to obscure our sights, to limit our perceptions, to narrow our hearts, and to close us down from the natural movement of life. And yet we try, when we find ourselves having closed down, to open back up. And we try, when we find some blind spot within ourselves, to see the world a little more clearly. And we try, when we find that we're burdening ourselves with low opinions of our worth and our ability to see ourselves in a better light. And we seek the help of our friends to elevate us. We seek their adoring gaze because we see reflected in their eyes a better version of ourselves when they look at us lovingly. But we nonetheless struggle with allowing what's inside of us to unfold itself with the same spontaneous, organic fluidity with which Shakti unfolds her creative possibilities within the space of Shiva's adoring consciousness. One idea of yoga is that yoga is an invitation for us to participate more fully in that divine contemplation by getting our egocentric projections out of the way so that the creative possibilities that lie dormant within our souls can start to unfold more naturally and take fuller expression. In other words, so that the seeds that are inside of our souls, the karmic seeds that need to ripen in this life in order for us to live our Dharma can do precisely that. To nourish those seeds, to hold space for them, to nourish them, to water them, to give them light, so that they can grow and so that they can flourish. And learning to do that thing is largely a matter of opening a space of loving awareness within which that process can naturally unfold. We are, as I just suggested, burdened in this process, impeded by all kinds of negative patterns of reactivity, by all kinds of dissociative emotional patterns, by all kinds of dark patterns of thought by which we cripple and subjugate ourselves and so impede our natural unfoldment. And the yoga tradition teaches that and I say it that way, the yoga tradition, because all the different yogas that I know, insofar as they speak of this problem, speak of it in generally the same way. Whether it's a tantric tradition or a classical tradition, a devotional tradition, that the solvent of negative samskaric patterns is a loving awareness. For Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra, with the theory of the kleshas that's so central to the psychology of the sutra, the kleshas as the seeds of suffering, the seeds of the mental activities that hold the mind in confinement, what scorches the seeds is the light of an awareness that's non-reactive, that doesn't give animating reinforcement to the patterns that underlie, to the imprints, the karmic imprints that underlie those negative reactive patterns. So, holding a space of non-reactive and yet attentive awareness serves at least two roles. One of them is to allow the negative samskaras, or the samskaras that underlie our negative patterns of behavior, to release the energy that's contained within them, to kind of wear themselves out. And the other is to allow the seeds that need to sprout and to flourish. And it's not as if we have rotten seeds and good seeds. It's not as if we have mixed seeds inside of us, and some of them are of a good variety and some of them are of a bad variety. It's rather that the seeds that we have inside of us that need to ripen in order for us to live our Dharma are there, and we're born with them, and there's a tremendous energy behind them. an energy of the sort that can bring, one of these great cashew trees in the garden, or one of the banyan trees that you find over the garden wall, these massive ancient trees, into being from just a tiny seed. The negative patterns don't come from those seeds. They come from disturbances in the natural unfoldment of other seeds. Our negative patterns of behavior come from interruptions in, disturbances in the natural, organic unfoldment of karmic seeds inside us that are that are longing to come to expression. Our aggressive tendencies, for example, are incited in us when our natural longing for love and friendship and community is frustrated in a violent way. When our natural need to feel that we belong in this world is not met, but on the contrary, denied. When our need to feel loved and to feel that we have some intrinsic worth is not met by the mother that brings us into this world, or whoever's in charge of taking care of us at that very tender age. When we're not given that affirmation and that acknowledgement, that reassurance that we belong here and that there's some inherent worth to our being, that creates a disturbance and is the foundation, can be the foundation for rather dark tendencies, right? And whenever we're wounded by someone, when we're very young or in a phase in life where we don't know how to process that, until we process it, until we reflect on it and bring it into a sane perspective and connect with some other understanding of our intrinsic worth, that creates a kind of damage to the psyche, a wound from which it has to heal. And negative patterns come out of that kind of thing. They come out of, then perhaps less dramatically, out of experiences of confusion and experiences of doubt, and perhaps long periods of patterns of emotional dissociation. My point here is simply that those kinds of negative patterns don't have the same depth or the same force of prana behind them as these seeds in our souls that are calling out for our attention, that need to be nurtured and nourished and brought to fruition through creative activity in our lives. Creative and loving, open-hearted activity in our lives.
Recording in progress.
Oh. Sorry, guys. I lost you there, huh? How long were you gone? Were you gone long?
30 seconds.
5 seconds? Oh, good.
30 seconds,
30 seconds.
maybe.
Oh, good. I can't even finish a sentence in 30 seconds, so that's not. I was saying that, the important point to understand here is just that these seeds that are inside of our souls that need to ripen in this life in order for us to live our true life and for our dharma to be fulfilled in this incarnation, those have a force behind them that's just tremendous and that far outshines the force of the negative samskaric patterns that hinder that process. Because those forces don't come from like seeds of, diabolical evil, right? They come from patterns that are established in the course of an interruption in the process of our organic unfoldment. And what interrupts that process is the activity of the egocentric mind. Not just our egocentric mind, but our egocentric mind in its interaction with other such minds, right? A kind of negotiation between minds and hearts that's involved in relating with other people, right? So a simpler way of saying all this is just we have mental hang-ups to the ripening of the seeds in our souls, and we can dissolve those mental hang-ups in the same way that we make space for those seeds in our souls to blossom. And that's good news. Because it means that we don't need two things, we just need one. And Shiva represents that one thing. He represents this open, adoring, supportive, loving, non-reactive, compassionate awareness that holds anything that appears in its space within its fold. And so yoga can be understood as a matter of bringing that kind of attention, bringing that kind of awareness to ourselves to allow our hang-ups to dissolve and allow those seeds in our hearts to start to sprout so that we can nurture them and care for them and tend to them lovingly throughout the course of our lives. The ability to do all of that depends on our connection to that deeper field of loving awareness. And when we connect to that, then we more align ourselves with that awareness, that transpersonal awareness that's continuously opening itself more broadly to the world of appearance. And this is how we participate more fully, more consciously, and with greater presence in the divine self-contemplation. Yeah. How do you bring that awareness then to your own body and mind? The kind of awareness that is at issue here is the one that you're enveloped in when, say, you walk out into the garden and you feel the breeze as warm and enchanting as the breath of some deep intelligence, and you see the golden light streaming through the branches of that great cashew tree out front, and you smell the sweet fragrance of those cashews ripening. And you're mesmerized by the beauty of it all. Overwhelmed even by the immensity of it, by the intricacy, by the improbability even of those trillions upon trillions of factors hanging together in a delicate balance to bring this very moment into fruition. A moment that contains not just the breeze, the cashew tree, and the golden light, but your body, your eyes, your ears, your skin, your awareness. And then to bring that same awareness to the inner movements of your breath, as if the breath too were just in that same space with the breeze and the golden light and the smell of the cashews. And whatever thoughts you might have to think, whatever sweet thoughts might be invoked by the magic of the whole scene as being part of the very scene itself. And whatever other beings may be in your proximity and may come to smile at you or walk past, and in that way weave themselves immediately and intricately and inextricably into the same tapestry of experience. To hold your body and breath in that same consciousness is to embody this philosophy of Shiva and Shakti. Thank you.
Thank you.
Omkaram bindu samyaktam Nityam dayanti yoginaha
Nityam dayanti yoginaha
Kamadam mokshadam chaiva
Kamadam mokshadam Shiva.
Om Karaya Namo Namaha.
Om Karaya Namo Namaha.
Om Karam Bindu Samyaktam.
Om Karam Bindu Samyuktam.
Nityam Dayanti Yoginaha.
Nityam Dayanti Yoginaha.
Kamadam Mokshadam Chaiva.
Kamadam Mokshadam Shiva.
Om Karaya Namo Namaha.
Om Karaya Namo Namaha.
Om Karam Bindu Samyaktam.
Om Karam Bindu Samyuktam.
Nityam Dayanti Yoginaha.
Nityam Dayanti Yoginaha.
Kamadam Mokshadam Chaiva.
Kamadam Mokshadam Shiva.
Om Karaya Namo Namaha.
Om Karaya Namo Namaha.
Aham.